this is your host, Julia Napini. I am a clinical and forensic social worker who owns a counseling practice and a consulting business. In this show, we discuss the challenges of being successful in business while maintaining your integrity and staying true to yourself. Join me while I interview other professionals and share insights from life and experience. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Compassionate Climb podcast. Today we are going to talk about life-changing experiences, and the person that I have on the show today is responsible for one of mine. Michelle Cater, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so glad that you're here. So Michelle is one of those people that I feel that I was connected to for a purpose and has grown into a really good friend. So we went on a retreat together this past year to Kenya, and I was very adamant that I wanted her to come on the show and talk about that. So Michelle, will you give a little bit of background? Tell the audience what it is that you do and why this particular retreat was important to you.
Okay. So a little bit of background about me is I'm a licensed therapist. I've been doing that for about 5 years, and I knew that I wanted to do something that kind of fed into the therapy community to kind of give back. And so a little bit about my personal background, my family's background is, for me, I'm Arab American. My husband, he's from Kenya. We have a transracial marriage and a biracial family. And so in the area that we live in, there's not a whole lot of diversity. And so I wanted to do something where I felt like we could give back by providing a training in cultural constructs, but doing it in an area that we were familiar with, or I should say more my husband. So my husband and I had previously gone on a safari. It was life-changing, and I was like, this would be such a cool thing to do for the therapy community if we offered a retreat in Kenya, which is, life-changing in and of itself, going to Africa, I think, and then doing a safari and bringing the training out there. And so that's kind of what we did. We kind of pieced it together, and we had our first successful retreat this past June, where we led on our very first retreat 29 therapists and family members and friends out to Kenya to do our first safari retreat.
And I can speak to the experience. So not having known you and Nelson beforehand and meeting on Zoom and getting to know you both and how you answered all of our questions and shared your background and why this was something that you were passionate about in a previous life or maybe an earlier point in my life, or a lot of people in my life probably would have thought, like, you're crazy. You're going to go to another continent with these people that you don't even know? And I feel like through my own evolution as a human being, I really trust my intuition and my gut. And I felt very early on this comfort level with the two of you, and your story really spoke to me. And you had had the experience yourself and were bringing your own children. So that to me spoke volumes, and you were really accommodating and willing to alleviate any of the anxiety that we had and prepared us really well. And it was absolutely incredible. So I definitely need to acknowledge that. So how would you describe your experience planning the retreat and then the experience itself and then your reflection after the fact? Because as we know, retreats are all the rage these days. You and I have had many conversations about this, and especially for mental health professionals, a lot of people are considering this or taking this on themselves for different reasons. And yours is very unique. And so I'm curious, after having one that was so successful, what that was like throughout, and then what your feelings are looking back on it.
Yeah. So I think after I went on my first safari, it was also my first time in Kenya, I should say. I was like, I need to do this again. Other people need to experience this. And also, my husband and I were talking about how we need to come out to Kenya each year and bring our family out there, because my husband's family is from Kenya. And so it was like this instant idea. I always wanted to do retreats. It was always, before I became a therapist, actually, I dreamed of doing retreats. And I wasn't sure what that looked like. And it was like a light bulb went off in my head. I was like, this is it. This is going to be my retreat. And we can use this as a means of bringing our family over to Kenya to visit family and stay there after the retreat. And so that's kind of how this vision, I guess, was born. And so this was really, I think, a big deal for my husband too. So just a quick background about my husband. My husband, he grew up in Kenya. He grew up in an orphanage out there and came over to the United States through that orphanage for school, and that's how we met. And so one of the things that was really important to him and also people who raised him was how can he give back to the Kenyan community? And so it just kind of served a double purpose. Like, this is a really fantastic way to just sow his culture back into what we're doing out here, to educate people, to do training, to bring our family out. And also we were taking a portion of that and giving it back to the orphanage that he grew up in. So that's kind of how it was. I guess this came about. I have heard a lot of people and how they went about doing retreats, and I kind of am the type of person who I don't like to follow other people's advices, I guess, or advice. I know it's maybe not, it's probably an unpopular, unwise decision, but that's just who I always have been, and so I've always kind of just found my own way. And so when I started planning this retreat, it was just like I had this picture in my mind on how I wanted to do things, and then the pieces just started to fit together. And in some ways, I feel like that really decreased my level of stress because for me, I have some ADHD, definitely self-diagnosed mild autism. And so I can go off in a million different directions in my mind. And so sometimes looking at what other people are offering can just be super distracting. It can be really discouraging. So my thing is I'm going to shut out what other people are saying. I'm going to create a vision, and then I'm just going to work the steps. And so it came together pretty easily for me. We kind of built relationships. It helps that my husband is from Kenya, speaks the language. So we were able to cultivate some really, I think, like long-term relationships with the organization that we do the retreat at. And then when it came to launching, I was like in my mind, okay, if like 5 people come, like I will feel like this is successful because who am I? I'm no one. Who's going to come to, like you were saying, like who's going to come to Africa with me? Like I don't have a name. I don't have a platform. No one knows me. And so I was just like, well, if it's meant to be, it's meant to be. And so I just started to advertise on Facebook in different groups. And I tried to make the price extremely reasonable because, again, my goal wasn't so much to make a ton of money, but to bring my family out there and give back to the orphanage. And so we were able to get a really reasonable price. And so people were just like really interested. They're like, no one is doing this. And so I was surprised to see how many people just signed up without even talking to me first. And so then I realized like I need to set up phone calls with these people. So after people signed up, I set up individual phone calls with all of the participants just to answer these questions. I put together a really thorough travel booklet that answered all the questions about traveling to Kenya, traveling internationally, so people could just reference that. And then throughout the year, I set up Zoom meetings for all the participants to get to know each other and make plans in traveling ahead of time if that was something that they wanted to do. So by the time we actually arrived in Kenya, we all knew each other. So many of them had made plans together. It was a really cool community. And on the other side of that, I think we all feel like family.
I can definitely attest to that. So the key things that stick out for me that gave me that peace of mind that this is where I needed to be and what I needed to do, it was you two sharing some of your personal story for sure, that you were giving back. So this wasn't just something for financial gain. There's nothing wrong with that, but there was also additionally this purpose and this mission beyond that. And it was also that you had done this before and you were coming from your own experience. It wasn't just, ooh, this is something I'd like to do. It was something that you had just done the year before and had already experienced that transformation yourself and wanted to continue to do it on an annual basis, include your family, bring your children. So those things were huge. So all of that really worked. So very grateful you did that. So you provided a training to all of the participants while we were there. And I have had several conversations about race being a social construct. And so I really benefited from the training. It seemed like the group did as well. And so I know you incorporate that in a lot of the work you do. I would appreciate it if you'd share some of that for the audience.
Yeah, so I was trying to think about, like I was saying at the beginning, something that a lot of people, well, a lot of people aren't doing trainings on constructs. I don't even know if a lot of people know what constructs are, but it definitely impacts the therapy room. And so the training was really around um, what what constructs are social constructs versus social constructs, the differences between the two, and how these constructs impact mental health in the therapy room. And again, being Arab American and my husband being from Kenya, and a lot of my clients come from all different kinds of backgrounds, I was realizing like we need more people like me, and we also need more white therapists being educated in how to address different social and cultural constructs within the therapy room, being able to recognize their own constructs and what they're bringing in, how to address other people's constructs and what they're bringing in, especially around trauma and like deviant behavior and things like that. And so,
Can you just define construct for those who aren't familiar?
so a construct is pretty much something that's like made up, like not natural. So a house
Mm-hmm.
is a construct, for instance, like we build it up. So something that's not based in reality. So another good
Mm-hmm.
example of a construct is, I'll give you two examples to compare it. So you have money as a construct because it's not made up. But coin is not a construct, right? Because a coin is made out of metal or made
Mm-hmm.
out of, um, gold, something that is real. But if you took away the idea of value and what money is, then it's just like a worthless paperweight, right? But the money is the construct, right? So it's something that
Mm-hmm.
we've made up and we've kind of um, added to our culture and to our society. So just some
Sure.
examples of some cultural and social constructs would be like marriage, religion, gender,
Mm-hmm.
um, eye contact, even. Again, like I had mentioned, deviant behavior, that's a big one that will show up in the therapy room. So those are just some ideas of like what
Mm-hmm.
constructs.
Okay. So how do you incorporate that in your clinical work?
So that's a really good question. So I think, when it comes to mental health, there's a couple of things to consider. Is, different cultures have different stigmas around mental health. So being able to know a person's cultural background is really, really important. And knowing that before you sit down and have session,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because once you sit down and have your initial session, it's your responsibility to be able to meet the client where they're at. And so I always tell people, if you don't feel like you're culturally competent, then it's a really good idea to help that client, if they are a minority identifying client, to find a minority identifying therapist. But if you do feel culturally competent, then sit down, acknowledge the differences that exist just in that culture. Know the if there are mental health stigmas, know um, what am I trying to say? Like know what the limits are. So,
Yeah.
like a lot of minority identifying clients don't have access to insurance the way that white people have access to it. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, I think that the statistics is that 80% of white people have access to health insurance versus 60% or 40% of minority identifying clients. So being able to, know those differences, being able to understand different family dynamics and how families in someone's culture views mental health,
Mm-hmm.
and being able to meet them in that space rather than coming in with our bias about how mental health should be. And I think therapists have a very strong bias on, mental health and the way that it should be viewed. So,
Sure, they can. So it sounds like at the outset, I guess I'm thinking for those listening that are in the mental health profession and maybe doing clinical work, what they can take away from this conversation as far as how to be more culturally competent and be aware of those constructs and how they may show up. So, what are some things you would suggest to someone who wants to increase their awareness of this and make sure they're doing it right?
I think it's definitely helpful to take trainings, to read books and just educate yourself as much as possible. I think being honest with yourself is really important. I think being able to educate yourself about community support and resources to bring people
Mm-hmm.
is also really, really important. Um, I think being able to acknowledge or well, know and acknowledge how different cultures might talk more about emotional symptoms versus physical symptoms, or some
Mm-hmm.
like we'll talk about both. So what to expect in the therapy room when you have a person from a different background coming in, um, and like asking them, like, hey, like,
Yeah.
just what does mental health look like in your family? Like, what's your family's view on mental health? And I'm sure that they will be able to tell you. And I think again, those conversations can only be had once acknowledging the difference. Hey, we're from different cultures, and so there are some things that I might not know,
Mm-hmm.
but also I'm going to do my best to find out.
Mm. So is this something that you found that you were passionate about even prior to this relationship? Do you feel like this relationship really fueled a lot of this for you because of the experiences that you were having as a result?
Which relationship?
Your marriage.
No, I definitely think it kind of pushed me.
Yeah.
But growing up, so I grew up in New England, in a pretty um, diverse neighborhood. There was a high population of, I would say, like Arab Americans. And once 9/11 happened, I think that was actually my push. Like there was a clear difference in how we got treated out there.
Mm-hmm.
When I come to the South, which is where I am now, people don't know what I am. I mean, people will just come up and talk Spanish to me. People will start touching my hair. They'll ask me if I'm native, what island I'm from. People say all kinds of things to me. And back at home, it was like people knew who I was, right? Because I
Mm-hmm.
was part of the norm. But I think after 9/11 and then also moving to the South, I started to feel really, really uncomfortable. People didn't know how to talk to me, what to call me, how to, quote unquote, label me.
Right.
And so I started to feel passionate about, helping people understand cultural and social constructs like back then.
Mm-hmm. I see. So it was already there, but it was the light had been kind of shined on it and it was impossible to ignore it for you. It sounds like once that significant event that impacted all of us.
Hmm.
Hmm. And you had almost kind of two huge culture shocks, one right after the other, like the move, 9/11 and the move, both. So how do you navigate that now with where you're living? Do you find your approach to be any different? So with all these people that you're describing that come up and how they approach you and your response to it.
Yeah, so for me, I tend to be more educational. Like I tend to educate people, especially because of the color of my skin. I'm very light.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel more of a calling to be able to say like no, like that's not correct, and this is why that's
Mm-hmm.
not correct. And I think I have more of a gentler approach, versus some of my friends, um, who are really offended when someone comes up and starts touching my son's hair, and they're like, how can you deal with that? And
Mm-hmm.
um, I think that I've become pretty tolerant, and I
Yeah.
think I have the heart of being an advocate, and so I want to teach people who want to learn, and I want to help create a new generation of people who are doing it right rather than doing it wrong.
Yeah. Well, we need more people like that. So it's refreshing for sure, but not always easy. So I definitely acknowledge that. So with this retreat, for those that are listening that are feeling like this is something that they would consider or they're interested in, what are your plans for the future with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So our website is reconnectmyself.com. So
Okay.
www.reconnectmyself.com. And the name of the business is Reconnect Retreats and Travel.
Mm-hmm.
And so this year in 2024, we are taking off because I'm launching my group practice. But we are doing a retreat in 2025. I have started an email list of people who are interested. There's a pretty high interest already. So for people who are interested, I would
Yeah.
say log onto the website, reconnectmyself.com.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a button that says, click on this if you're interested, and it will send me your email address and phone number. Um, and then once that retreat um, starts to come, like I get the date secure, I will start contacting people for that.
Okay, great. And then for people who want to learn more about social constructs, what are some good go-tos or things that you have found really helpful in your own work?
as far as like resources.
Yeah, so this training that you provided to us, is that something that might be available to other people, or a lot of the information that you acquired in order to provide it? Do you have any suggestions for where people can go? Good books, websites, resources?
Yeah. So this is so the training that I'm putting on. I'm working on getting this approved for CEU. So hopefully this will be a training um, that will be available in the future to be able to do online or in
Great.
a hybrid format. But one of the trainings that I know of, at least in my area, it's called
Hmm.
"Are You Doing It Wrong?" And out in the Asheville area, there's a board. It's called A Therapist Like Me. I serve on that board, and that board, the whole mission of that board is to connect minority identifying clients with minority identifying therapists.
Hmm.
And so if you're in North Carolina, you can sign up, and there's a whole voucher program for clients who might not have access to health insurance, where that organization will pay the therapist with vouchers, and then that client will have access to therapy sessions. So that's a really great resource. It's called the
Oh,
therapistlikeme.org. They also have some really good training. Another really good book, White Fragility. I think it's been going around for a while. It's a classic, but it's really really good. And I think just googling some anti-racist trainings that have solid
yeah.
backing. I wish that there were more trainings on social and cultural constructs, because the social and cultural constructs, it's not so much about like an anti-racist. It's not an anti-racist training, but educating people about the constructs that we're dealing with in the therapy room and the culture of different people that we're sitting down with. So they
Hmm.
clearly in the overlap, but it is. I want to be clear, it's not an anti-racist training, and I do think that people need both.
Yeah. Okay, that's helpful. And then I'm assuming, just knowing you and everything that we talked about today, you will likely be looking to create a diverse group of individuals for your practice. So, where can people keep an eye out if they're in that area and looking for counseling to watch your growth and expansion?
Thank you. Yeah, so the name of my group practice is called Executive Wellness.
Hmm.
The website is www.executivewellness.health. And
Okay.
part of the mission of Executive Wellness is to grow a diverse group practice in the Asheville area so that people can sit down with a minority identifying therapist, like in person if they want that.
Hmm.
Um, so hopefully over the next year or two, we'll be able to grow that vision will come to pass. And so people can follow me on or refer to my website. Yeah.
Great. I'll make sure to include all of that so it's easy. So, one final thought that I have, I'm just thinking of people listening. Work life balance is something we discuss a lot, and how, as mental health practitioners, we're not always great at that. You've got a lot of things going on. You are a visionary for sure. You have great ideas. So, how do you juggle all of it and stay sane? Do you have tips for the people that are listening when we have these ideas and things that we want to pursue, to avoid getting overloaded and stay focused on the things that really matter?
Yeah, so I tend to have like one to two things that I'm working on at once. And so if I
Mm-hmm.
have ideas that come, I'll write them down. Like I have a it's almost like a vision board. Well, I'll write my visions down so that I'm not forgetting them. But I tend to want to do them all. So I have to constantly bring myself back to, these are the things that I'm working on. So I'll never have more than two things that I'm working on. And then, as far as self care is concerned, I am always committed to taking Fridays off. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't work Fridays, Saturdays, or Sundays. Right now, I see clients still. I'm seeing them 3 days a week, and then I do Thursdays my admin day. But I try to create a solid extra day off that I am not
Mm-hmm.
scheduling anyone. I'm not doing any admin things so that I am, at home 4 days and, or I'm sorry, at home, yeah, 3 full days, and then
Mm-hmm.
working 3 days with clients and one kind of like in between day for admin. The other thing that I
Okay.
do that I should say, I think if you haven't heard of Kristen Neff, like every therapist should, she does a lot of mindful self compassion work. She's my favorite, and I practice her stuff all day. So she's a great. She's a
Huge fan. I'm surprised we didn't connect on that before.
Yeah, I love her. She has a great workbook. It's called Mindful Self Compassion Workbook, and it's my absolute favorite.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Great tips. resources and cool things that you have going on. So I'll make sure to include all of that information for people that want to stay tuned. I really appreciate your time and thank you for such an incredible experience. I am excited to see what comes in the future with your group practice and future retreats. So thanks, Michelle.
Thanks for having me.
If you like what you're hearing, please rate and review. This will help others find us and benefit as well. The Compassionate Climb podcast represents the opinions of Julia Napini and her guests. The information provided is intended for educational purposes only and should not be taken as legal advice. If that is what you are seeking, please consult an attorney.